Johnny Tremain, Chapter 5, Part 4. Before reading the final part of Chapter 5, allow me to ask 3 questions to guide your thoughts and reading for the key details of this part. Number 1. How has Rab affected Johnny as a person? In other words, what influence has he had on his life, his behavior? 2. What are the 2 events that reveal more to Rab's character? And 3. What expression is used to describe a Silsby? Expression meaning a phrase. And so we begin the final part of Chapter 5, Part 4. So far in his new life, there had been one, and only one, slight disappointment. Rab was so self-contained. It was as if nothing could come in from the outside to upset him. He owned himself. By temperament, Johnny was expansive, easily influenced. Although Rab would have been exactly the same if he had been the son of the wealthiest merchant or the poorest tinker in Boston, Johnny would not. When he had been the prize apprentice of Hancock's Wharf, the envy of all the other masters, the principal breadwinner of the Laphams, and he knew it, he had been quite a different boy from the arrogant, shabby young tramp of late summer and early fall. Those market women who had counted their pats of butter after he brushed past their stands, Mrs. Lapham, with her prophecies that he would end on the gallows, had not been so far wrong. For a little while, it had been the touch and go with him. If pushed a little farther, he might have taken to crime, because that was what was expected of him. But no matter what happened to Rab, good or bad fortune, good or bad reputation, he would never change. Johnny felt he knew him but little more than at their first meeting, but he admired him more and more all the time. Rab did not criticize him, but he had a way of asking him why he did certain things which had a great influence upon Johnny. Once, as they sat in the attic toasting cheese and muffins by their hearth, the older boy asked why he went about calling people squeak pigs and things like that. Johnny was always ready to do his share, or more than his share, in fanning up friendship or enmity. Sometimes it seemed to Rab he did not much care which. Why do you go out of your way to make bad feeling? Johnny hung his head. He could not think why. And take Merchant Light. Everybody along Long Wharf knows you called him a gallows bird. He's not used to it. Was it fun, he wondered, going about, letting everybody who got in your way have it? After that, Johnny began to watch himself. For the first time, he learned to think before he spoke. He counted 10 that day he delivered a paper at Sam Adams' big shabby house down on Purchase Street, and the black girl flung dishwater out of the kitchen door without looking and soaked him. If he had not counted 10, he would have told her what he thought of her, black folk in general, and thrown in a few cutting remarks about her master, the most powerful man in Boston. But counting 10 had its rewards. Suki apologized handsomely. In the past, he had never given anyone time to apologize. Her, "Oh, little master, I's so sorry. Now you just step right into the kitchen, and I'll dry up them clothes, and you can eat an apple pie as I dries," pleased him. And in the kitchen sat Sam Adams himself, inkhorn and papers before him. He had a kind face, furrowed, quizzical, crooked-browed. As Suki dried and Johnny ate his pie, Mr. Adams watched him, noted him, marked him, said little. But ever after, when Johnny came to Sam Adams's house, he was invited in, and the great leader of the gathering rebellion would talk with him in that man-to-man fashion which won so many hearts. He also began to employ him and Goblin to do express writing for the Boston Committee of Correspondence. All this because Johnny had counted 10. Rab was right. There was no point in going off half-cocked. Twice that fall, he saw Rab moved out of his customary reserve. Johnny always spent Friday night with Rab's folks in Lexington. There were hundreds of fine acres called Silsby's Cove. Old Grandsire, who had brought up Rab, lived in the big house, but he had sons, grandsons, nephews close about him. Grandsire, Major Silsby, was confined mostly to his chair, an old wound he had received fighting 40 years ago and in the French and Indian Wars, had stiffened up on him. At the end of harvest, the Silsbys had a dance in Grandsire's big barn. There were at least 20 Silsbys there, and both Johnny and Rab came out from Boston. The tall, powerfully built, silent Silsby men were easy to pick out from among the neighbors and friends invited, but Grandsire and Rab were more completely Silsbys than anyone else. At this country dance, Johnny for the first time saw Rab move suddenly into action. He flung himself into the dancing. Johnny thought in amazement how nonchalant and even sluggish Rab could seem about the printing shop, and yet he did his work with a machine-like perfection. Now he saw the dark eyes glowing and the white teeth flashed. It was amazing that an old fiddle in Grandsire's hands and the old voice calling, "Gents round the ladies, ladies round the gents," could work such a change in him. He had stepped out of his imperturbable usual self. Here was a Rab Johnny had always known existed, but had never been before seen. All the Lindas and Betsies, Pollys, Peggys, and Sallys of Lexington were clamoring to stand up with him. He loved to dance, and seemingly all the girls loved him, and he all the girls. Johnny, 2 years younger, noticed with disapproval. One other thing happened at that barn dance that made a great impression on Johnny. He forgot entirely about his hand. Although in the reels and jigs they danced, every moment a different girl was clinging to it. None of them seemed to notice. Johnny spoke of this fact to Rab as they undressed at Grandsire's. The Boston girls, he was thinking of Isana's words, such cruel words he had never even told Rab, had said his hand disgusted them. He wasn't to touch them with it. "It is you who put the idea in their heads," said Rab, pulling off his shirt. "You know, you usually go about with that hand in your pocket, looking as if you had an imp of hell hidden away. And then someone asks you, and you pull it out with a slow flourish, as if you said, 'This is the most disgusting thing you ever saw.' No wonder you scare everybody. Tonight happens, you just forgot." The other time he saw Rab moved out of himself was a few days later. The Webb twins were timid, weakly little fellows, natural butts for any bullies. They never seemed to need any company except each other and their cat. Mrs. Lorne one day sent them to the butcher for stew meat, and they, thinking it was an errand a cat might enjoy, carried her with them. The butcher's boy was a well-known tyrant. He grabbed the Webb's cat, trussed her, hung her up by her heels to a hook, and began to sharpen his knife. He was going to butcher her, skin her, and give the carcass to the Webbs for stew meat. The butcher sat by and roared with laughter at the frantic children's tears and cries. Rab heard the terrified screams of the little boys. He rescued the cat, who was the first to get home, with the Webbs on their heels. Next, he began on the butcher's boy. By then, Johnny had arrived. Together, they took on the butcher, his oldest son, the butcher's wife, armed with boiling water she had prepared for scalding pigs, her mother, and a passer-by. Yet, before the constable had arrived, Rab was out of it, back cleaning his press, and he had got Johnny out of it too. Johnny had a black eye, a lame shoulder, a torn shirt, a bite in his wrist. That was the butcher's wife's mother. She had good teeth for 70. Rab had nothing except an uncommonly high color in his face and a look of intense pleasure. It was strange that a boy who could fight like that and enjoy it so intensely never quarreled, never fought, and he had almost nothing to say about this really Homeric battle. But for days afterward, Johnny would see a look of dreamy content in his eyes, a slow smile form absent-mindedly on his lips. Rab was thinking of the fun he and Johnny had had at the butcher's shop. All he would say was, "We certainly made a hash of that shop." The boy was a born fighter, ferocious, utterly fearless, quick and powerful. But he didn't fight often, and he hadn't much to say afterward. Seemingly, Silsbees were like that. Johnny had already seen a pack of them out at Lexington, and there over at the Lornes was Rabbit, repeating the old pattern. One day, Aunt Lorne came in as Johnny sat reading, with the baby in her arms. For once, she looked a little discouraged. "My land, I don't know what's wrong with the baby. There's something, and he won't tell me." "Isn't he pretty young to tell much?" "Oh, no. Other babies can tell you whether it's gas or a pin, or milk souring on them. But he's a real Silsbee, and they never do, you know." "Aren't you Silsbee too?" "Me? Oh, no. Thank heaven, it skipped me. Look at my red hair, and my build. I'm just like Mother, a mere Wheeler. I can say what hurts me, sometimes before I'm hurt. Those Silsbees, they just about can't. They don't tell anything, but they are about the best men ever lived, if you'll just learn to take 'em or leave 'em." Johnny was learning to take or leave Rab.